Hey designers, welcome back to the studio. So maybe you have this huge collection of shapes and you're kind of working through these designs and it just isn't clicking for you, right? You're just not sure how to turn, just this collection of junk into interesting design. Well, let's talk a little bit more about some possible sort of hidden structures or organizing principles that you could use in your design to bring not just more complexity to it, but more visual interest. It's actually just going to kind of help you to think more intuitively about the design process so that when you encounter shapes and you start to work with them on a page or a computer screen or anything else really, these things just start to flow. The first one that we talked about in previous tutorials was the 1-inch base system. That really is just kind of this basic, really basic organizing structure idea that, like, if you take a bunch of shapes that were all cut out of the same piece of paper and based on the same kind of unit of measurement, everything kind of falls into agreement whether you intended it to or not. And I think that probably is best described as just fit. If you're always using the same sort of units of measurement, you never really have to be super concerned about fit. You'll just kind of stumble into it. It's basic, but you'd be surprised at just how effective using the same units of measurement is. There are certain elements of repetition there, and visually, shapes that are all kind of fitting together into that kind of agreement may be a really stable, maybe a really attractive design. Let's go even further and say repetition, right? The repetition of the same exact shape, not just the same exact measurement. In this case, I just have a whole bunch of like 1/2 inch by 1 inch rectangles here, and if I repeat that shape over and over and over and over again, this could be circles, it could be triangles, it starts to kind of flip some switches in your brain where your brain starts to see rhythm in these designs, even if there's not a whole lot of sort of structural organization to it in terms of how I'm composing the space, just the repeated shape over and over again. If I want to kind of take a little bit more of a historical approach to this, I could say that repeated patterns have appeared in all sorts of design and painting throughout human history, and we can kind of borrow some of those historical patterns in our contemporary designs too, and they reference things that your mind or even your body, so you're moving through a space that's been designed, an architectural space that's been designed. Your body has felt these before. Your eyes have seen them. Your hands have felt them. They're patterns that are all over the built environment, and so they'll start to feel familiar. These sort of repeating patterns, historical patterns, are infinitely scalable. So they could be as small as something like a small logo or a business card, or as big as a football field, or as big as a city, right? And so there's a really rich history of repeated patterns from all around the world that can be kind of researched, can be cited, can be referenced, can be built upon. Now, another way to think about sort of hidden structures, something that's going to play well whether you're thinking about cut paper or designing things in the computer, and that's alignment. This idea that invisible lines that sort of cut through the design that you're working on can sort of help arrange the space. It just so happens that our clear straight edges work really, really well for this kind of work. If you have a bunch of shapes that feel kind of randomly distributed around the page, use your clear straight edge to sort of bring them into alignment. If I can do that, with this sort of straight edge of the ruler, I could also do it with the sort of hidden edges on a clear space. So say, for example, if I lay a white shape onto a white background, oftentimes the camera just kind of eliminates that, right? It simplifies it out. But I could use this white shape to start to organize some other shapes around it. If I use another kind of series of simple geometric shapes here, I can kind of use the edge of this guide now to help me organize shapes around a curve that otherwise would have been sort of, a little bit difficult to see or maybe a little bit sloppy. So I could build in designs that sort of reference that line. Now, if I scooch all these in just a little bit and lay that back on top, I can actually sort of use this white shape doubly, not only as an organizing, but as a sort of a tool for erasure, right? It organizes as sort of a hidden guide, and then also kind of erases or cuts some of the paper that I already have. Alignment is just sort of this invisible edge that you can kind of see, you feel it, it's there, but it isn't an actual shape. It's not something that I added. This gets really interesting, particularly if I started to cut some of these shapes up and make them really small. I could suggest the presence of a circle or a ring, or for that matter, a nice swooping curve in the design. I could suggest that presence without ever having to include that curving line. Now, if I can use sort of hidden structural guides, I can also use sort of feelings or felt directions in a design. If I want to align everything in this sort of along a universal diagonal that cuts through the whole design so that all of my alignments sort of move me diagonally through the design, that's one way to do it. I could also use other sort of feelings of sort of more gentle, almost waving grass-like flow in a design. And this sense of movement in the design is less about directing me into any one particular place and more about just kind of using these static, still shapes to sort of give me gentle, organic sway to a design. This type of movement might be more interesting to somebody who's less interested in the sort of harsh, sharp edges of sort of complex polygons and geometrics, and more interested in suggesting naturalistic spaces, naturalistic feel, waving grass, moving water, flowing hair, things like that. Now, another way to kind of think about this idea of guides is to think about enclosure or framing. So if I take a design like these moving waves and then start to cut it off or entrap it, I could use one of these rings that I've cut using the circle cutter and sort of start to close off the design. Or, for that matter, just bring in larger sheets of paper once I've kind of blocked off the bigger bits. This sort of allows me to sort of close off that design and give it only a limited context. And the edges of the circle here now sort of give that a container. I think that it's important to sort of come into contact with some of these big ideas because even though you may not think repetition as a designer down the road, it is sort of handy to remember that there are these hidden structures embedded in a lot of design that are there just below the surface. And if you know what to look for, you can even start to use them in your own design. This list that I've kind of started with you guys today is not exhaustive by any stretch of the imagination. There's so much more to think about in terms of structures and historical approaches to design. But these ones should get you started, and it should at least start to get you comfortable to sit down and play with your designs. If you can start to feel comfortable and start to feel almost like there is an intuitive takeover when you start to move shapes around on a page, that means you've started to internalize some of these ideas and you don't even really need to think about them. You just sort of start to work with them and play. That's my goal with this exercise, and what I'm looking for is that you document each step along this process. If you hit something that you're sort of interested in, stop, photograph it, and add it to your portfolio. We're looking for somewhere between 50 and 100 reference points like this for our designs down the road. I'll see you guys in the studio.